Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is June 16, 2024. That's Bloomsday. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure today to be here with Thom Null. Where are you calling in from, Thom?
Calling in from Wildwood, Missouri. I'm calling in from Wildwood, formerly Grover, Missouri.
How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
I think that's probably a matter of opinion, like almost everything else. But based on my experience, and I would say that gentleness is the best thing. That being able to feel for other people is the best thing for a person. And second to that is probably like a Reuben sandwich. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. Way to go. Do you know that's funny because do you know jujitsu means soft and gentle art and science?
What does jujitsu mean, Jerry?
Jujitsu etymologically breaks down to soft and gentle art and science.
I'm not part of the jujitsu tradition. We're all judo people where I come from. No,
Yeah.
there's also some kickboxers. The let's see here. You were getting a little. Your video was getting a little wiggly there in the middle.
Yeah, it was just that you used the word gentleness. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, and that is connected to jujitsu. I never thought about that. That's very clever. I feel like being attached to Finnegan's Wake people is the best way to get in touch with everything else because you have to study it. You have to be aware of and study everything in order to care about that book.
That's right. And it is the question I could ask you is what's the difference between art and science?
The difference is as a joke. I mean, my cynical feeling is that the difference is that in many circles they're only regarded for their ability to generate revenue, but the other thing is that for most people they take science seriously in theory and maybe or maybe not in practice, and a lot of people don't even pretend to respect artists.
Yeah.
I mean, prior to the pandemic, everybody said, "Oh, I believe science. I trust science." Even religious people would talk about being pro science, but we saw very quickly whenever push comes to shove, people's verbal respect for the profession, it goes away. Whereas with artists, the world relies on art to survive and to thrive and to function and move forward, but we don't ever get the respect for it. Most artists are viewed as either born to do art and therefore it's not something they deserve credit for because it's just they're like an auteur or something that was just born to, which many people are. Not all artists, not even most of them. Most artists are artists because they're in the practice of art. And I don't know how you would define that in other lines of work, but I would say that the main difference is that it has pretty much always been societally acceptable to regard artists and art lowly and to disregard them as, either as being I think that anti-art is often just anti-intellectualism, and America is one of the real like strongholds of anti-intellectualism. And so a book like Finnegan's Wake has a snowball's chance in hell of becoming a popular book in the United States. But I think that that's all part of the nature of the book. Like it's a niche subject, and the people who care enough to learn about what all of these, I've learned more things in the last 48 hours because of Finnegan's Wake than I learned in maybe 4 or 5 years in school. And it's been the main source of it's been a secular Bible for me. It's been a thing that I can always dive into, and absolutely 100% of the time I come away with something. I always feel like I benefit. So anyway, yeah, with science, I think I think you have to at least pretend to respect them. With artists, you can just say, I could do that.
It's really good. Thom, what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
It kind of depends on my mood. I think as an autistic person, and as an adult now, I think my favorite way to receive information is through the feeling in my body, to receive tactile information. Whenever I was a little kid, ever since I was a little kid, my mom tells me whenever I was a toddler, if I got mud on my hands, I was terribly sad. I was upset. I was completely dejected if I got mud on my hands. And I now as an adult, I don't go out of my way to be uncomfortable. I still find that my reaction to being sweaty or being out in the open or being in some I feel like I'm enjoying it much more, which is really kind of a new thing for me because I've always been and so I've always focused on my mind as a separate region, as somehow different from my body, which I now look back on as being completely ridiculous because the mind has a physical origin and the mind and body are connected. They aren't two separate things. And so now I'm treating my body probably a lot better. I've been a vegetarian for many years. I exercise a lot. So now I think eating food, walking in the woods, being around animals. I go to the butterfly house. We have a local butterfly place here near where I live, about 20 minutes away. And I go there all the time. I've been there 70 times this year. And I play music there for the butterflies, and I get into a sweat because they have to keep that place at more than 75 degrees year round, and always very humid to replicate the tropical environment that the butterflies and plants come from. And so I would say that as an adult, my favorite way to receive information has been tactile. My favorite kind of information now. Yeah.
Really good, Thom. And why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think why is kind of a loaded because there can be meaning in things that is subjective, purely subjective, and not objective. And so I will, for the sake of being humble, I'll say that I can't say what the objective reason is, but subjectively, I feel like it's such a deep need that it transcends the desire to verbalize it. Like I could give you some answers and they would all be true, but they would all be a fraction of the total truth. Whenever I'm playing with my band or playing with another person, especially, or if I'm making art with visual art with another person or something else, like I'm doing it because I am intentionally being connected to something and someone else. And my whole life, in some ways, I've always felt really disconnected from people, probably a lot of it because I'm autistic. And so I'm engaging in a conscious attempt to be a part of humanity and to be a part of this world in a way that previously I wasn't comfortable with doing. And so,
Dude,
yeah, there's that.
you're doing great. You're really articulate. I appreciate your word. You're a wordsmith. You're really communicating to me well. Is
It's
this
why I love the
need?
wake, Jerry. It's the words,
Yeah,
man. It's the words and the feelings. It's why I'm addicted to it.
yeah. No, this is amazing to do this on Bloomsday of all things. So
I literally didn't even think about that. The fact that you announced it at the beginning was so amazing to me. I've been so wrapped up in going through the wake and making notes and thinking about stuff and thinking about how I feel about stuff that literally the date completely escaped me. I'm completely, and I'm actually right here. I'm actually reading Ulysses all the way through for the first time in my life right now, and I am currently on page 390, 383 in the original annotation, 390 in the final. So I've only got a few hundred pages to go, and man, with how obsessed I am with the Wake, I really wish I would have done Ulysses first in some ways, because there's nothing that can that can be a peer or a compare to the Wake in my heart. But I've found a lot of joy in reading Ulysses and seeing the references, hearing tap and thinking about tip, and how that like it has been very pleasant, but it also is amazing to me and totally ridiculous, and though in some ways understandable on some level, why people who are so in favor of Ulysses almost universally were against the Wake. I feel like that's the most sympathetic thing that I feel about this project is that it was a project of love and obsession. Whenever I read the Wikipedia page for the responses to the Wake, I am always so sympathetic, and I'm always in such an emotional, like I could read from some of them right now. It's like every person that he loved and every person he respected and who respected him were all taking turns kicking him in the teeth. And it is just the most vicious. And the man was blind and dying. And everybody, Aldous Huxley, D.H. Lawrence, Mrs. Weaver, H.G. Wells, his own brother Stanislaus, everybody takes turns, and they are just kicking this guy right in the fucking teeth over and over and over. And the way that they do so was very, very creative. They found such ironic, creative ways to talk crap on the Wake and on Joyce. That whole organization for the peripherization and the somnambulation, that whole anti-group that formed against the Wake, that is hilarious. And the fact that Ezra Pound thinks that he is even remotely relevant enough to be able to talk that way about the Wake. The fact is, people of my generation and the generation after mine, they, outside of college, do not read Ezra Pound. They do not read Samuel. They don't read Beckett either. They don't read any of that shit. And a lot of them don't read Joyce either. But a lot more of them are aware of Joyce than Ezra Pound or Beckett or Harriet Weaver or anybody, any of the people who had such bad things to say. And just because we may or may not be able to get back to it later, I'm sure everybody here who's a fan of Finnegan's Wake, they have already read the entirety of various articles, everything, because everybody in the Wake community is very literary. They're very into reading other stuff. So most of them have heard this before, but to hear his brother and hear other people's way of describing their response to it, I read through his letters, and stuff like that. It took such emotional effort to come up with such terrible things to say about Finnegan's Wake, which I consider to be the closest thing to a religious text that was created in a secular environment in the last 100 or 200 years. So yeah, I'd love to, if there's ever any time later on, if we have time later, I'd love to just read from the negative criticism of the Wake, but I will direct everybody to just read the entirety of the Wikipedia article. Start from there. There's some hilarious, awful stuff.
Yeah. And Peter Quadrino's Pantheon article is sort of the opposite. So it tells you people like Terrence McKenna, Johnny Depp, Jack White,
Right.
Ryan Johnson, these incredible pop culture people your age
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
more people my age who are total Wakians over being
Right.
Ulysses. Oh no, the Wake.
Right.
Anyways, it is the Wake's better than Ulysses if you're biased like me and you. But the Ulysses is great, but it is
It's
an amazing thing. So
yeah.
the next question, Tobin, is I love your diverts into the Wake. Keep going all you want. But here's the next question. Is this
Cool.
need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Um, the fact that every record we have of ancient man and even like some other primates who we share an ancestor with, the fact that they all transmit information and save information and transmit it from person to person and keep it even if it's not being received, it totally answers that question, I think, without a doubt for me. I think that that means that if it was created, it was created so long ago that none of us can even hope to find any proof of that. And if it is innate, which feels more true, the fact that every single group of people everywhere on the world and almost every species, keep in mind every animal has to tell its children that animal, this poisonous animal is dangerous. And it has to have a lore that it can draw from so it can communicate to other people, including, other members of the species that they aren't directly familiar with. They have to be able to transmit information from one person to another. And if it wasn't language, it would have been something else. If we'd come up with language, we would have had to have come up with something else. It's kind of like what they say about the devil. If he didn't exist, we would have to invent him. And if language didn't exist, we would have to invent it. I'm watching my nephew Waylon, a sweet, wonderful child with very interesting verbal qualities. I'm watching him learn language for the first time. And it's really, I've seen other babies, so it's not like it's the first time, but it's the first time that I've spent this much time with one infant during the process of language acquisition. And it's fascinating, man. It fills my heart with love and joy. I love that kid, watching him working with all of these things. And I think that the comparison between things like abstract art and sound poetry, like from Yacht Blanc, for example, and other things like that, to draw a comparison to childhood is obviously hackneyed. It's been said 100 million times, but it's also true. We're connecting to something that's very deep and that is innate, which is our inner experience of our inner and outer self working in connection with one another. And so whenever I listen to, these thunder words and these combinations of, blah, 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 and all this stuff, I'm then go over and I interact with this baby who, if you thought that the comparison to a child learning language was insulting, you should look at how amazingly complex their brain is becoming as they're doing it, and how much effort it takes and how much that it takes for a child to learn language. You can really understand that it's not insulting at all to say the first thunder word. And most people, whenever they get to that 101 letter word, they run those. But the ones that don't, they're the ones that join the tribe. And of course, you're probably familiar with Shibboleth in the Old Testament, that story about determining whether somebody was a part of your linguistic and cultural group by asking them to say a word that a person from another area might pronounce a different way. In the Old Testament, this group of people did not generally use a sh noise, and so they would say Sibboleth or something without the H, and that's how they were able to determine who this person was and kill them. By the way, but that that's almost the opposite with something like Finnegan's Wake. We find out that somebody speaks the shibboleth, and then we do the opposite of killing them. They become alive in our hearts forever. The first time I heard about you guys finishing Finnegan's Wake after 28 years, you guys became part of my universe. And that then whenever we connected, then you became part of my peer group in some way. And I love it. We know the shibboleth, and we both speak the language, and it's a shared language of the wake. And the people who can make it through, even if if two people are totally different, the fact that they have completely different interpretations of Finnegan's Wake is not only the point and inevitable, but also the very basis of a work like that. To try and have a single idea about that book is ridiculous, because it is the ultimate endless book that you could read for hundreds of years and you wouldn't get a millionth of it squeezed out. You wouldn't even get a fraction of the orange juice, but we're still squeezing, and that's innate. So I'm squeezing it, you're squeezing it, you squeezed it for 28 years. I'm only 30. So you guys were squeezing that orange, whenever my tree was just barely bearing fruit. But you guys, without knowing it, we're planting seeds of trees that you may or may not get to enjoy the shade of. But I'll spend the rest of my life reading Finnegan's Wake. And ironically, whenever I get old and I start to become senile, they won't know that I'm not actually speaking gibberish. I'm actually just speaking in Wakian. Yeah, I've always told a friend of mine, Yacht Blanc, the sound poet, by the way, I told him there's no such thing as becoming senile if you're a sound poet. You can just become a better sound poet. Because I think that if your whole job is to use syllables to make noises, even the person who's totally lost the most to dementia could still be a totally amazing sound poet. So I feel the same way about being a wakeoid.
Yeah. Listen, Thom, you have to hear this one really quick.
Yeah.
Marshall McLuhan kinda broke the Finnegan's Wake code, sort of.
Oh yeah.
And at the end of his career, he had brain problems and he could not talk anymore. And he
Right.
would hold his grandson, Eric's son, his name's
Uh-huh.
Andrew McLuhan, in his hands, the little baby,
Uh-huh.
and they would babble to each other. So I told Andrew, you were talking Finneganese with the McLuhan, because
Yeah.
Mark couldn't talk, and Andrew didn't know that he was talking Finneganese. But that's essentially because I said, did you ever meet your grandfather? And he goes, yeah, I talked babble with him. And I says, no, you talked Finneganese with him.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's 100% true. And Marshall
Yeah.
McLuhan taught at St. Louis University, where my band, named after Finnegan's Wake, is going to be performing next Sunday. So tell me that isn't connected. Yeah,
That's very connected.
that's
And
crazy. Yeah, he taught. It's a Jesuit, and it's a Jesuit college. Tell me that
yeah,
isn't the ultimate irony. I'm taking a Finnegan's Wake themed anti-Catholic masterpiece or whatever, that takes the piss out of the religious concept, and I'm taking it to a Jesuit college, and I'm blaring my instruments. There's something really great about that.
that is dude. Listen, Marshall called the wake the Black Mass. Look up Black
Wow.
Mass. Black Mass is a heavy concept. It's not written about much, but
Yeah, and honestly, I think during one of Harriet Weaver's insults, kind of described it somewhat similarly. Let me see if I can quickly find it in this pile of insults. He says,
no. Let's move on.
"Go ahead, go
Find
ahead."
that later. But it's really
Yeah,
cool. Because the
Oh,
other
no, no,
thing
no.
about
I have it right here.
okay,
Pardon me.
go ahead.
He says, whenever she makes that comment about the wholesale safety pun factory, she says, it's very short actually. She says, I am made in such a way that I do not care much for the output from your wholesale safety pun factory, nor the darknesses and unintelligibilities that your deliberately entangled language system of your deliberately entangled language system. It seems to me you're wasting your genius. So whenever she
Wow.
referred to those darknesses and stuff, like that's exactly what she's referring to. There is he intentionally went out of his way to make a book about the day and about the night. And if you can't understand it, then you can't take as much from the wake as you possibly could.
And she's key in saying we all should waste our genius. You have to unlearn and
Yeah,
for everything you know is wrong. That's fireside theater. So it is a key to learning is how to unlearn.
yeah,
So that's what
yeah.
she's
I
basically saying
agree.
waste your
I agree
genius
completely.
as a deeper thing. So uh is do thoughts create emotions?
Um, well, there are people who don't have what we would traditionally call thoughts, who still have feelings. And so it certainly isn't necessarily so, but I think a lot of our emotions do come from thoughts. Because why should it be the case that whenever I think about a room in my grandmother's house, who's dead now, and don't even go there, if I just think about that room, I'm immediately covered in this shadow, this veil, this sort of like dark veil that makes my entire body ball up and feel the feelings that I felt the last time I was in that room. So it's the thoughts. If I had that part of my brain removed, I could walk into that room and I wouldn't maybe have any emotional reaction. But I can't even imagine walking into that room without like my tear ducts acting up and my nose kind of separating. And frankly, I didn't even know the lady that well. But the thought generates so much emotion. And that's definitely true of Finnegan's Wake. The language from a semiotic point of view is the transmission of signs and signals. And hopefully for most of those, you're intending to have a recipient. And Anthony Burgess, maybe one of the most famous big fans of Finnegan's Wake, of course, he talks about how funny it is. And whenever my girlfriend hears me reading page after page of the Wake out loud in an Irish accent or whatever, and I'm laughing and laughing, she's laughing at the fact that I'm laughing. But because she hasn't spent hundreds of wasted hours finding all of these little references to Vikings that ruled Ireland that had a son who had a kidney infection or whatever the hell, I mean, it's only because I've invested all this meaning in the thoughts that then whenever they're drawn back upon, that I feel a great deal of emotion. And if you like the Anna the Almeza, full bringer of plural abilities, that section relies on the fact that you have at least a passing understanding of several other religious statements like the Bismillah and the what's that, the Apostles' Creed or the Lord's Prayer or whatever. But he makes references to both of those prayers throughout here, and the fact that you know what the format is already means therefore that you have the thought already preloaded, so to speak. Not that that's exactly how brains work. We're learning more every day about how it is. It's not really like a storage facility like we thought, but that it's still preloaded in some way, so that whenever we say her rill be rung, her springtime sprung, as unhymned as it is uneven, and then I laugh, is because that's funny. And to try and describe why it's funny, I would direct you to the fact that people have written hundreds of books trying to garner a comprehensive theory of humor. The fact that all of these intellectual collegiates and people on the street can't come up with an agreement on what humor is means that it's just as untranslatable as Finnegan's Wake on a fundamental level. Like somebody was talking about how you can translate Finian Twig to another language, but if the person who's speaking Tongan doesn't have, they can of course find a lot of those references. Many of those people have the internet and have the books, like Joseph Campbell's and stuff is probably there. They can order it. There are logistic ways of getting those on print, but and digitally. But unless they're really based it in those references, they'll have to make a much larger effort, and it's worth it. It's very fun and pleasant. But a person who isn't already kind of soaking in it from the time they're born, they have to actually, it's like I watch Indian films and I can see why a lot of the things are funny, and I laugh a lot at the references, even the ones that are a little bit past my ken. But I know a lot of the times why they're funny. And if I didn't have any of the cultural knowledge that I have of India and their culture, I would just be laughing because the laugh track goes off, or because somebody else in the theater is laughing. I would be having just a mimicking reaction. But yeah, thoughts, emotions, they're who knows with the chicken and the egg, but they're definitely connected.
Yeah, you're really articulate, Thom. I really appreciate this. And that word is contagious. Laughter is contagious. That's the beauty
Yeah.
of laughter, is you don't have to get a joke. If everybody's laughing and you're laughing, it worked. In fact,
Yeah.
Gurdjieff, Gurdjieff said laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no. So it is.
Wow.
And then we'll get into that, but let's keep going down the
Wow.
script. Here's the next one, Thom.
Sure.
I don't know what I think until I fill in the blank.
I don't know what I think until I contextualize is the first word that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Um, I I can hear something happening, and I can have no idea that my brain is spontaneously making millions of calculations per second so that I can contextualize it. Whenever I heard there was a woman, I was standing on a street corner trying to get people to vote back in 2016, which I'm not involved in that project anymore, but it was a last ditch effort. I was trying to get people to vote back in 2016, and I had one run up to me screaming, "Come with me." And I didn't know what her context was, but I knew enough to know that the right thing to do is to just go. And I knew that there was a possibility that something bad could happen to me, because I've watched television and I know that you can be misled and people can be led into a dark alleyway and beaten up or something like that. And there was a lot of people who were addicted to meth in my hometown. I didn't know what was going to happen. And in this particular house, even. Um, and so I go in, and there's a woman laying on the floor of her bedroom, and she can't get up. And she's like apparently near death. And she was much larger than I was. And I grabbed her and I used all of my energy to lift us both up. And as far as I know, she's still alive. I haven't talked to that family. I saw one of them at a funeral not long ago, but I don't know. But it wasn't until, like, I had to do a lot of my brain had to do a lot of rapid contextualization of what was being asked of me, who was talking to me, what direction it was coming from. And so I don't know what I think until it's in relation to other thoughts. In other words, to contextualize.
Beautiful. Really well put, Thom. This is just so enlightening for me. Again, I thank you. So here's the next one. Well, let me just tell you, I don't know what I think until I say it is McLuhan. I don't know what think, and I don't know what I think until I write it is Joan Didion. So, anyways, I thought you were
That's
going to
interesting.
say,
I love how often that I disagree with McLuhan, given how much I respect him. I'm mature enough as a thinker to know that you can disagree with someone and still respect them, unless it's on like a fundamental human rights issue. But like McLuhan, that guy, his conception of things totally, in some ways, it's intellectually very stimulating. It goes through my hairs, because we're probably both, because we're Wakeoids, we're Wakeans together, whatever. But But I, as often as I agree, I disagree with the conceptions about, you know. But then again, maybe it's because I don't know enough. Maybe whenever I learn more, I will agree with different things and disagree with what I'm thinking now in ways I don't even. I used to not like Mark Rothko paintings. I
Yeah.
used to not get them. I didn't think that they were good. I thought that any painting that didn't look effortful was lazy and therefore wasn't good, which is a pile of assumptions that I learned from my culture without my permission. And so I had to unlearn that, as you were saying earlier. I had to unlearn a lot of those things. And then now, whenever I think about Rothko, I think about just my heart. I think about my feelings and my soul and my experience with life. So,
Yeah. Key word you said in McLuhan is he wants to be called a media theorist in Wikipedia, but he's not a theorist. He's in academia and they call him theory. So you said concept twice. He
yeah,
wants you to think he's doing concepts.
yeah,
Very key. He was teasing people to believe his percepts were concepts. So he was
right,
purposely
right,
throwing you a curveball so that you
yeah,
would go, "Hey, you're a charlatan." That's it. He wanted to be a jokester charlatan, but he didn't want people to call him that. He got his picture on the cover of Newsweek magazine as the TV guru. He's not TV, he's
yeah,
literature, but he's saying in
yeah,
St.
yeah. It's
Louis,
totally a literary thing.
saying
Yeah.
St. Louis, he's saying in St. Louis, we have to study
Wow.
comic books and advertising because I can't reach the kids if I teach them poetry. So he started
Right.
his first book, read the intro to Mechanical Bride, which was the big thing that came out when he was in St. Louis. So that's the key is you got hoodwinked by him, rightfully so. You should be
Right.
hoodwinked.
Right.
You should be
Yeah.
hoodwinked by him. Now you
And I
know the
enjoyed it
secret,
too.
but now you know the secret code is that he basically was deep down saying percept, which you're talking
Right.
about. Tactile.
Right.
He said television is tactile. He said perception and probing. He's about asking new
Yeah.
questions and new metaphors. So that's
For
why
which
his
we
book,
will always respect him. And there's a
yeah,
reason why his name even is relevant to some people now, even though there's less people reading collegiate literature outside of their own education, maybe than at previous times. Why his name still has any validity whatsoever is because he was thinking way, just like Joyce, he was
oh,
thinking way outside of where his expiration date was going to be. And
yeah,
I think that's what makes him a giant. And I'll tell you what proves his theories in some small way about the relationship between people and media. I never heard of him until I watched that Woody Allen movie. And I
yeah,
watched it a bunch of times at the time because I'm autistic. I watch movies hundreds of times. I've seen certain movies like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory or The Big Lebowski. I've seen them more than 400, 500 times. I mean, an obsessive number of times.
yeah.
And I also obsessively rewatched that, and so I got to see that, that section where McLuhan steps out and confronts and there's wasn't willing, he since he was the intellectual who was willing to interface with a cultural aspect that was considered a lower aspect of culture, like all of the things we've discussed, movies, television, comic books, advertisements. The, the existence of all of the art that I'm into now, you'll have to Sorry about that. I guess we got cut out.
No worries, Thom. I want to tell you one thing about Woody Allen's Annie Hall really quick because it will
Do
help
so.
you understand. He tried to get Fellini and Buñuel and he couldn't get him, so Marshall was his third choice. You got to realize Marshall's line, he says, as a question normally, Marshall would say, "Do you mean my whole fallacy is wrong?" That's a question.
Right.
Woody had him say it
He
as
says
a
it as a
statement.
statement. You mean my whole fallacy is wrong.
That's presenting McLuhan to pop culture medium backwards. Now that's
How
okay,
hilarious.
but that's okay because Marshall's other line that he says somewhere else is a half a truth is still a lot of a truth. So even though he presents Marshall backwards, he still presented Marshall.
That's funny.
Okay, here's the next one, Thom. Can humans think without language?
Films it's trying to present itself as. Just wanted to make sure we didn't get yanked apart here. Okay. Yeah, but no, it's yeah, whether we're talking about McLuhan or Joyce or any of them, they're all shooting for something that's way past the time whenever they were going to be dead. So they were reflecting on things that were happening in their own time, but they were trying their best to think about what was the thing that was an epoch that was forthcoming.
Can humans think without language?
Again, I think that there will probably come a series of studies that give us a sense of confidence about the answer there. And I think that the only beautiful questions are the ones that will always need to be reaffirmed in their truth or not truth. Because over the course of reduplication, they weren't relevant to our real life experience. But a question like that, a question. What were the exact words of the question? Because I want to answer specifically.
Can humans think without language?
Um, there's probably multiple phases of language, some of which are pre-language, because I think it depends on which language nerd you're talking to. If you're talking to a very wide angle semioticist, they'll tell you that the definitions are much wider. But if you talk to somebody who's a very limited, narrow thinker in language, like Noam Chomsky and his associates, they have tried to narrow what language is at every turn, which I think is partially, even if what they're saying is partially true, I think it's a knee-jerk reaction to try and preserve something for humanity that's separate from the rest of nature. And it's a leftover of this enlightenment, pre-enlightenment thinking of trying to make the animal kingdom and then the human above it, by saying that animals that are definitely expressing feelings with sound and with other forms of communication, body communication and tactile communication and smell and whatever, the fact that they are using multiple levels of conversational and expressive levels, the only people who are going to gatekeep that are assholes. And I think that those are the Chomsky people who want to say that language is only this because that's how we've always believed it. They're deferring to tradition in the worst possible way, whereas the wake perspective is something that is so much bigger than that. It's so much bigger than tradition. And I think that Chomsky and all those other people who don't think that the answer is yes. I think those people need to reassess their definitions. For me, I know that not only animals are expressing things that ring emotional to me and communicative, they're communicating in high levels. So I think to deny that they're communicating very strongly and with specific chosen manner is undoubtable. The question is whether or not the assemblage of sounds or other types of communication, whether if you add it all together, whether you can call that language without a grammar or syntax. Again, these people could learn something from Finnegan's Wake if they think that you need an exact syntax and grammar to express feelings and communicate, because all of Finnegan's Wake communicates feelings and information, and there's practically no recognizable syntax in the entire thing. And so for me, yes, I think people can think without language, because people still have feelings whenever the part of their brain that is for communication is removed. They're still crying, they're still looking for things, they're still reacting. So they're still having thoughts and feelings, even if they're not having thoughts and feelings. And same thing with animals, and the animals that mourn, the elephants that mourn for their dead comrades, and all of the other species, and not to mention the small children, the babies. It would be like asking, does my nephew, Waylon, who is about 8 months old, I think, is born on October 1st. So I think he's about 8 months old now, almost, or maybe just turned 8 months at the beginning of this month. Anyway, maybe 8.5 now, but time is flying. It's like asking, is he having feelings? Look at him. Of course he's having thoughts and feelings. What kind of stupid shit is that? Like, he doesn't have language, he doesn't have syntax or grammar, he's not expressing anything traditionally. But what kind of asshole would look at him and say he's not communicating and having emotions and feelings and thoughts? What assholes are these that are pushing off these theories as scientific fact? You know, why aren't we circling around these people and telling them to answer for their sins? Like, I've emailed with Noam Chomsky for 17 years, okay, off and on. You may not know that about me. I emailed him the first time when I was 13 years old. Every single time that I've ever emailed him, his response has been traditionalistic, patronizing, and always in favor of the status quo. And if that has anything to do with his linguistic theories, that guy has got miles to go before he gets anywhere near something I can respect.
Wow, you got to publish those.
So
Publish those emails.
the
Anyways,
answer is yes for me, and I don't have the ego to say that it has to be the answer for everyone.
yeah. Thom, you have ESP because the next question starts with the Chomsky quote. Check this out.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
A language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Hold on, I caught 90% of that. Hold on, Jerry. So give me the very last tail end of that. Sorry, after culture and tradition.
Right. He says language is not just words, it's culture, it's tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Then my question is, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Well, there's probably very obvious answers. People that can't agree on what things mean are necessarily going to have a much harder time having a shared reality. And I think that there's I talk about this with my girlfriend Kendra very much. You know, without some type of shared reality, two groups of people can never meaningfully dialogue ever in any way that leads to meaningful, lasting change. And it's obvious because what I think of whenever I think of freedom is diametrically opposed to what 94% of Americans think of when they think of freedom, because of the hegemony and the pedagogy of thought in the United States, where we have an explicitly individualistic and anarcho, don't care about other people perspective. From there, um, the I want to make sure that I actually answer your question. What was what exactly were you asking?
What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Yeah, what do you do? That was the part that was tripping me up because I feel like everybody has their own techniques and they all work and don't work in measure. So there are some people who feel as though they are successfully communicating by only ever talking about things upon which they have an agreement. A lot of people can manage to get along with their families and coworkers and people in their church and other social groups because they just don't meaningfully communicate. They still send signals, but they're not sending signs anymore, you know, in the Umberto Eco sense. You know, they might be sending out shapes, but they don't have any intended recipient who they're hoping to have a response from. And so I think for a lot of people, it's about not. It's like the way that you can get around it is by just not doing it. There's a lot of people who, you know, every few years in the United States and around the world, a series of social events happens, some more significant than others, that lead to people and individual cultures within a culture determining what the new norm is. Whenever I was growing up, there was a shared reality among most Americans that we were supposed to be, after 2001, that we were supposed to be wary of outsiders and people who have traditions that are different than ours. And it has been ever since then the norm in the United States to harass people who are dressed in traditional religious garb, like Orthodox Jews and Muslims. And that has not gone away. And so communication about what freedom meant was, we have to keep all of these people in an active war zone that our country is creating, and we have to imprison them and forcibly acclimate the ones who we have to take in for brain drain purposes so that they can accede to the greater culture. That freedom for us meant the exact opposite for everyone else, that our freedom was gained at the lack of freedom for the rest of the world. And so by the use of language, using words like freedom and liberty, every preceding generation, the Reagan generation and every other one, they've used those words as a tool of war so that the communication can't happen. And so I actually have no meaningful answer. And I don't think that the example I'm going to give now works for most people, because you're probably familiar, because it's been everywhere, of the story of, I think his name's Daryl Davis. He's that black musician, very talented black musician, who went out and befriended a group of KKK members and eventually got quite a few of them to leave the Klan. This has been, even though it's an amazing story, and I don't know if they've ever followed up to see if any of those guys ever like meaningfully stopped having racist beliefs or if they ever went back to the Klan. I mean, I don't know if there's any follow-up studies that have been ever done there. But anecdotally, this is trotted out by liberal-minded people who describe themselves as liberal. I don't think they are, but people who describe themselves as liberal in the United States, it's trotted out as the perfect story of what we need to do is just learn the language of in this case, a group that is in favor of violent oppression of other people, that we need to learn their language and we need to speak their language so that we can communicate to them. And I think most people try and make a good faith effort to communicate to their family members and their church members and their friends so that they will be more like them, but also so that they will oftentimes learn new modes of empathy and learn new modes of communication that are meaningful. And so the example that of Daryl Davis, or I believe that's his name, is an amazing one, but it is the exception, not the rule. Most people who are living in a culture that is xenophobic, racist, homophobic, Islamophobic, every other phobic you can imagine except phobic of anyway, I don't have time to come up with something clever, but anyway, they have every kind of phobia you can imagine. And a lot of people will claim that it's not a phobia. It really is. I think a lot of those people are actually afraid of those people, as I think it's actually fear for a lot of them. But whenever the dominant hegemonic power determines what the language is going to be and determines what the reasonable options to select from are, that also prevents meaningful discourse. I think it's because of the false narrative style of America and American politicians and Western and maybe worldwide. But I think that language is very, very deep in our problems. And that's what I can tell you now. The examples that I can give personally, I found a shared relationship through a shared language with a guy who lived in my hometown. His name is Vincent. And I have now known him for 10 years, more than 10 years, a dozen years maybe. And when I met him, we had almost nothing in common. We both played music. We both were in favor of cannabis legalization. We were both very suspicious of police and of state agencies. And that was about it. That was basically what we had in common. And by focusing at first on just those things, and then by having conversations where we differed, we were able to communicate to one another in a way in which I don't think I became more right-wing by the things that I listened to him saying. I understood more of how the emotions were happening on their end, and that aided a lot in interacting with people like that. And what he learned was the way that I chose to present it to him was, you believe in the traditions through the Bible of humanity and of the specialness of the individual human soul. And you have to have political beliefs that are in line with that. And so we had long conversations for years. It took probably 7 or 8 years before I ever saw any actual change, or he saw any actual change. At this point, the guy is a convinced Christian communist, and he has changed a lot of his positions politically to be more in line with an empathetic, thoughtful, Christian, actually Christ-based lifestyle. And so we shared a language, and it was meaningful, and we've been friends for years, and he's still one of my closest friends. I don't think that works for everybody, though. I don't think that works for most people. I don't think just trying to share a language has been enough for most people to bridge the divide.
Yeah.
So I just don't know.
That was good. A friend the other day, I says, what's the best thing for a human being? He said, to become a better listener. So it sounds like with Vincent, you're both learning how to listen to each other and not so much challenge, but go, why is he saying this? So that also reminded me of my favorite Lily Tomlin line, reality is a collective hunch. So
that's true.
Yeah, that commonality you talked about.
That's true.
And then the next 2 questions are from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
I choose to leave the door cracked on that one at this point in my life, to the degree that I no longer take an egoistic assumption that I, a creature that's been for so few years, has the total truth on anything. But I have always had the strong suspicion that either, not so much that there is no soul, but that what it is has to be understood differently. Like maybe through the lens of like Daniel C. Dennett, and his discussions about philosophy of mind, and getting into that philosophy of mind. He taught at Tufts University and several others. He just passed away not long ago. He's one of the only members of that new atheist thing that I can even remotely tolerate. Richard Dawkins is an asshole. Christopher Hitchens was an asshole, and now he's dead. Now he's a dead asshole. Sam Harris is a racist, Islamophobic asshole, and still is and always will be. And Daniel C. Dennett actually managed to be, in most of his work, a very thoughtful person who tackled this question very honestly. He didn't believe that the soul exists, but he believed that there is a physical basis for the psyche, and that the psyche is a secular equivalent of the soul, is a paraphrase of some of his thoughts. That if he had to answer questions about souls, which he didn't believe existed, he would answer more in the realm of the psyche. And I don't think anybody denies that the psyche is real. We're all experiencing it. You're standing right in it. I mean, of course, you have to take into account all the philosophical things about how our minds can play tricks on us and stuff. But you're right in the middle of it. Even if you're in the tricks, you're right in the middle of it. You're experiencing it physically. You still bleed whenever you get stabbed, man. So I think that it is not, or that if you should replace the word soul with the word psyche, and the answer would be yes, probably.
Really good. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
I've heard some very convincing arguments for both. I think the arguments for the idea that they can think come from an optimistic perspective that hasn't lined up with reality so far. I think that it depends on what you mean by think. Like as thinking is a product of a living psyche, the answer is strictly no. There is no Chinese box theory there of we're inside of a, whatever screen and we're having stuff flash before our consciousness or whatever. There is none of that. I mean, there, as far as we know. But can a machine combine memes, individual elements of a thought, as well as reading discourse and generate their own ideas? They're their own in the strictly metaphorical sense. Yeah, definitely. And they will in the future. That's why years from now, you're going to be going to a robot therapist and there isn't going to be a human on the other end. And it's already happening. It's already in the process of being a reality right now. So whenever I say in the future, I'm talking about within my lifetime, probably. And so whether they can think, it's like, what does a human do whenever it thinks? On one level, it's just combining ideas that it's had before with ideas that it's being presented with right now, and running that through their emotive lens of how does that make me feel? And so on that level, if that's all you're trying to get a computer to do, yes, I think that a computer can even be taught to feel pain, and can be taught to feel the electronic equivalent of pain, and therefore could write from an informed perspective as a hurt agent, as an agent who has felt pain. And I think that that's the higher level of thought, which that's the level on which Turing is trying to distinguish soul, is because you absolutely cannot, at this point in history, program soul. But I mean soul in the sense that blues singers talk about soul, not the way that metaphysicians talk about soul. We are a physical creature. We poop on the ground. That's the beginning, middle, and end of that for me.
Really good, Thom. Yeah, the soul could be spelled in a Wakean sense, SOLE. We're grounded. And you know,
Right.
I've got it. We already have machines feeling, because Stanley Kubrick's HAL in 2001, and check this out.
Yeah.
You'll love. Do you know why Kubrick made 2001? It's in his Playboy interview. He said to convolute McLuhan. He said to twist McLuhan. He literally said that was his motive. Then
How
he
funny.
invited Marshall to a pre-release screening, and Marshall fell asleep after 10 minutes. Which was Bruno through a la Harry Smith. The purpose of cinema is to put you to sleep. So that's too
Yeah.
many dots. I skipped a question, Thom,
Go
because you
ahead.
kind of answered it, but I want to go back to it.
Okay.
I'm going to set it up with two things.
Okay.
Bridget Bardot says, when I make love, I don't think. I'm like, good luck. How do you turn off your brain from thinking when you're doing the most sensuous thing? Well, it's
For
like
sure.
people saying, when you meditate, think about not thinking. Okay. Then there's a bumper sticker on my street on a car. It says, don't believe everything you think. And I go, well, you could switch it. Don't believe everything you feel. So we
Yeah.
know that humans invented the words feeling and thinking that we could separate them, but we know
Right.
they're totally connected. But the question that I skipped, that I still want you to give me any thoughts on, is
Sure.
are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
We feel much more than we think. And we are thinking while we're feeling a lot more than we think we are, but on a more what would be described as a subconscious level. People aren't always aware that their blood is boiling. People aren't always aware that their blood is boiling, but it's boiling nonetheless. And so you can
Yeah.
have a feeling that your brain isn't even aware of. I think that, I mean, as for Bridget, good for her, I guess. For years, I would have considered that an ideal, because I had being embodied so much that it would have been much easier to not do any thinking. And to a certain degree, tactilely, I guess I agree with some element of her premise, but I would never want it to be that way necessarily, because I don't think that there's anything worse than not being able to connect with someone. And people who are mentally prevented from doing that, they're the people that I have maybe the most sympathy for, because it's the most basic good thing about being a creature, let alone a human. And so for me, I separated intimacy from the physical actions of a human body, but that was very much facilitated by technology and a very alienated society in which I was growing up. But now, as a person who's making conscientious decisions to be emotive and connected whenever I'm interacting with people on any level, I've always done it to some degree, but now I'm really conscious. I'm enjoying the ecstasy and the agony, instead of loving the one and fearing the other. And so I feel like it'd be a real shame if, like, a person who has a illness like what was called psoriasis and nymphomania and stuff, like, the main distinguishing characteristic is that for them, it's impossible for them to turn that part of their brain back on to be emotional and physical in that way at the same time. And that is why for years they've said that those people can't conventionally love. And to the degree that that's true, to the degree that anyone has lived a life that makes it to where they no longer can connect, I think that that's the most pitiful thing you can be. And it's exactly how I felt for years. I read a lot of Nietzsche, and I felt very self-righteous in feeling like everything was doomed and terrible and everyone sucked. And that was a way of not engaging. And now I have to engage. I've made many promises with people that I need to stay alive for them. And that was the first step towards realizing that in order to have a future, you have to have a meaningful future. And in order to have a meaningful future, you have to be engaged. And so engagement is key to the degree that anyone is able to do it. And anyone who can't do it should be working towards it, hopefully.
What kicked you over, Thom, to change that?
I don't know. It might have just been that I grew up and I was getting certain chemicals whenever I was in my teens and early 20s, like hormones, that were inspiring a more me against everyone or a more aggressive antisocial thing. So maybe it just mellowed out with age, so to speak, over the course of a number of years. It could be something just as simple as that. I'm not getting all the same competitive, angry steroids or whatever you want to say. But the other thing is I guess the engagement is the thing. Like it was hesitant at first and has become more like my motto now, that I tried to implement it in my early 20s, and then now that I'm 30, I feel like I'm much more actively living with these mottos. But I want to not negate people. I'm thinking about the feelings that are beneath the mottos, not really the mottos themselves, because I live by a lot of little rules, not rules in the sense that you must do this, but like a signpost for how I'm supposed to treat other people. And whenever I realize that I'm living outside of that, I have to rein myself in. I have to realize that if my mind and my body aren't in sync, and I'm not making my body, including my mind, do the right thing to other people, other animals, whatever it might be, then I need to actively be engaged in change. And I think that maybe whenever I was more depressed as opposed to manic, I just couldn't get myself engaged. And so it's not that easy, right? But I just, one of the mottos that I guess I think about the most over the course of the last 15 to 20 years has been some variation of, if you're going to live, live. And I don't mean that in the sense of living recklessly or living selfishly or eating a lot of food that I know is bad for me. But I feel like instead of feeling like I'm in prison in this body, in this life, which I did, instead of feeling like I'm in prison, I feel like I had to come to grips with the fact that I wasn't right, that isn't what life is. Like, there is no objective life. There's the objective circumstances that people are facing, but everyone's experience is subjective. Now that I've known enough people that were terribly poor and also had a lot of love in their life and loved their life, and I've also known enough people now that make money and are not at risk of starving, but are still miserable, I realize that there really is a much deeper level to our feelings and to the world that we're living in. And I think that alienation on one level is the thing that's keeping us away from engagement, and a good piece of art will engage you, especially multiple works of art. So the thing that pushed me over might have been the art. I also took psychedelics as well, which might have had something to do with it, but I feel like I was really engaged by art, and by feeling other people's feelings through their creation, and by feeling my own feelings through their creation, it also awakened the deeper level of an artist in myself. And now I'm hopefully doing that on some small level for someone else.
Yeah. Words evoke more than their meaning. The word heart, you brought up love and you brought up this empathy, really good grounded feelings to me, Thom, through your words. The word art is in the word heart. It's in there, but it's not etymologically. It's not etymologically. Right. So the next question, Thom, is, do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
It's meaning. I think my body wants to be happy in the sense that it doesn't want to be sad, and we could define what happiness is if it's a negative definition or a positive definition. But I want to be stimulated and I want to feel alive, and I want to do so not at the expense of other people as much as I possibly can, as much as the capitalist system allows. Our daily life is built on the exploitation of animals and human beings that we consider to be beneath us, who are invisible to us because of the what do they call that, commodity fetishism. We see a product on a shelf as being its own entity instead of being the product of exploited labor and stolen land. And so we aren't really engaging with the thing, we're engaging with a facsimile of a thing that doesn't allow us to feel the feelings that should be evoked. Whenever you're wearing a shirt, there's a good chance someone who is under the age of 18 engaged in some labor that made that shirt. And you don't need to focus on that every hour of every day, but avoiding that religiously as a avoidant neurology, that is, or neuroticism, that's not good. We shouldn't be so disengaged with the totality of our experience that we just refuse to think about things that make us uncomfortable. If Finnegan's Wake can't teach us anything else, it can teach us that.
Yeah. That's Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He says happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning does.
Yeah. I've heard it as happiness and joy being two separate things. And so I never thought about that until I was around the Mormons, but I was listening to a discussion among some Mormon men, and they were talking about how joy lasts and happiness is transient, and that's why we search after joy instead of happiness. And of course they find joy in community and in unity and in the scriptures, and so do many other groups of people. It may not satisfy most people in this day and age, but it does for the people that it does. And yeah, I think that meaning has been the most important to me because I had access to, and I was told to use the internet to search for philosophical and metaphysical ideas that did not come from my home. I was raised by a good mother. I don't have anything exactly philosophical to say about Father's Day, but I was raised by a mother who had my best interests at heart. And one of the things she taught me was don't trust anybody, do your own research. And while I'm less focusing on the not trusting part, I'm still obsessed with doing my own research as much as I possibly can. And so I have a lot of feelings about that. And I think being able to have Wikipedia, looking up different philosophy, reading Kierkegaard as a 13-year-old, reading Nietzsche as a 12-year-old, reading, whatever Schopenhauer as a 14-year-old, trying to come to grips with the world whenever I hadn't even, lost my virginity. I'm out trying to figure out the wide expanses of meaning in the world. And I settled on this. I think the closest thing to truth is the existentialist belief that we can make meaning by being active in the world. That's the most important thing about existentialism, is that we don't have to be crushed by the loss of objective meaning, God being dead. We don't have to be crushed by that. That doesn't have to be the end for us. And we can build meaning every day, and we can make it mean anything we want. At best, we're going to do something that's good for the largest group of people and that's the harmful to as few people and animals as possible. But that's my opinion. I think the search for meaning is beautiful.
Yeah. Thom, does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
I haven't read enough papers on the strictly physical part of the brain. And I know that people like Daniel C. Dennett and other people like him have done a lot of research about the relationship between the mind and the what we call us, what we call the ego. I have heard a lot of really good riffs on this question. The Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, they believe that intelligence as a concept, as a force, has existed forever and was never created. In the Mormon creation story, God creates the universe out of pre-existing matter unorganized, is the term that's used in the Mormon temple, which is amazing to me because the ex nihilo creation is so the norm with Christians and Muslims and Jews and other monotheistic religions. They tend to believe that there was nothing and then there was something. But the idea that a mainstream religion can have the idea that there was something that was just always kind of out there, I think that's amazing. I think that it's admitting that there's knowledge that we're not privy to. It's a humble thought. It's a humbling thought. And so he says, let us go down and, and organize this matter unorganized. And I think that there have been so many studies where they're to find out at what moment we went from just, quote unquote, being animals to being thinking people. And that's probably a completely fruitless, pointless quest. Because, first of all, who gives a shit? Second of all, because we're in it, baby. There's no real meaning, but but people who believe in the Big Bang also believe that there was something else, and then there was something that happened, and then something was created, and then something became more than something through some various theories. And that theory is any, and it's the one that it's probably the true one. But yeah, I don't know.
That's good, Thom. I gotta interject a quick anecdote. Frank Zappa, when he was dying towards the end of his life, Captain Beefheart was also dying. His comrade, and they both
Yeah.
watched a documentary on PBS about the Big Bang Theory. And Frank asked Don, what came before the Big Bang? And Don said, the big.
As much of as complex and often very distasteful characters as those two geniuses proved to be, they offer us an unending wellspring of fascination. I've spent more time researching the Magic Band, Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band, than almost any other subject.
Nice.
I've talked to most of the guys that played in that band at different times, with only a few exceptions. I talked to Mark Boston. He recorded some voiceovers for a cartoon I was making when I was a teenager. Never panned out. I have an autograph from Zoot Hornrollo, Bill Harkle-Rode. John French Drumbo is a big conspiracy theorist nut who thought that COVID wasn't real, so kind of an asshole, but he also is one of the smartest and most bright members of the group, whose recollections are very, very interesting. And Jeff Cotton, Antenna Jimmy Simmons. I've talked to various later on members of the group, members that played with the Tragic Band era, people that played with his comeback, including the great Robert Arthur Williams. I have to tell everybody out there, check out his work. Robert A. Williams, a great artist, visual artist, and a great percussionist, a singer as well, multi-instrumentalist. He's currently asking for donations for his household necessities. So if anybody wants to reach out and send some donations via GoFundMe or through a personal means, you can get a hold of me and I can send the money to Robert, or I can tell you how to get to him directly. He's a great artist. He worked with not only with all of those Beefheart guys, but also with a lot of other really great Zoog's Rift and a lot of other. He did some stuff with Hugh Cornwell from the Stranglers. He did an album called Nosferatu. He's a great artist, and he needs our help now. If you'd like to purchase some work from him, he does it digitally. And
that was a great plug for Robert in helping him.
Sure.
I appreciate that because I know Robert, and I asked John French all these same questions years ago, and I had the privilege of Captain Beefheart called me 52 times in 1991, once a week in the middle of the night.
Wow.
And it was pretty heavy, but I'm glad you went on that Beefheart rant. I didn't know that.
That's heavy, bro. I know everything there is to know about, at least especially the leading up to Top Mask Replica and the years after that. I mean,
and the sad thing is Don never wrote his book. So all these people wrote their books. And did you know Jan, Don's wife, was Manly P. Hall's secretary?
Wow, I guess there's something I didn't know. How hilarious. Wow,
so
I didn't know that at all.
We do whole salons on Beefheart, so we'll have you on
I could go on for days and days on that topic. I will say that the reason why Beefheart Don Van Vliet will always have a Pete Rose style asterisk next to his name in the Hall of Fame is because he couldn't keep his genius composed to respecting other people's bodily autonomy. And if that guy would have ever thrown me down a flight of stairs, we would be talking about the late Don Van Vliet and the aborted Trap Mask Replica project. Because if that guy wanted me to eat a can of beans every week and beg for money and lock me in a dumpster, that guy would be deceased. He wouldn't have been able to live long enough to get muscular dystrophy.
Tom, you didn't hear Don's version, so you.
That's true. I mean, I guess there's always going to be new information. I noticed behind your head, by the way.
I'm glad you researched him, and I encourage you to continue. It's
I will do so. I noticed that Sun Ra is behind you, by the way. Just if we're talking about wacky, crazy genius, I noticed that the great intergalactic genius of all time, Sun Ra.
Don't get me started. And then
no. I just give a shout out there. Marshall Allen, happy 100th birthday to Marshall Allen.
Yeah. Oh, Marshall Allen. Oh my God. And then there's the residents. And have you seen the 2-minute trailer for the Butthole Surfers documentary?
Oh no, I haven't. I actually talked to one of the residents. I talked to one of those guys on the phone one time. I don't know how many people got to have that pleasure. I called their management company and I got taken down this rabbit hole. And all of a sudden, the voice on the end of the line is totally one of the voices from those albums. He goes, hello. He does the whole get up. Dude, I asked him if I could use some of his music on an animation I was making. And I was like, I'm not trying to make any money off it. He's like, well, if you ain't making any money off of it, you ain't got to even send us an email. Right. And he's really cool about it.
Yeah, that's cool. Tom, back to Beefheart. Here's my mantra. My mantra. The stars are matter. We are matter, but it doesn't matter. That's Don Van Vliet. That's beat poetry at its best. And
he's despite his many shortcomings, that guy is one of the biggest influences in my entire life. I've listened to Trap Mask Replica at least 300 or 400 times, for sure. I'm a big influence from him. He definitely. Whenever I dropped out of school, I remember thinking about his quotation: "If you want to be a different fish, you got to jump out of the school."
That's beautiful. Okay. I asked for 90 minutes and we're at 90. I want to close this and encourage you to book a part 2 because we could do an 8-part Netflix series with you. I mean, usually I get through a third. Usually I get through a third of the questions. We're on it's basically about number 10 out of 40. So this is really cool and I really have had fun. Here's the next question.
If there's any other really important ones, we can do it a part 2. But if there's anything you want to ask, I'm here to answer.
No, there's a couple more here. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I have seen light go really fast, but not nearly as fast as I've thought. I'd say it's thought on that one.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. There's no right or wrong answers, but that one you got right.
Yeah.
let's end out there because this has just been so overwhelming, Thom. I really appreciate your time and energy. I really learned a
Of
lot.
course.
And I thank
It's the autism, baby.
you. And I want to say, even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. And
Absolutely.
whatever you do, book part 2 as soon as I send you the dates because the
I
dates
will.
go really fast.
I'll look it up, man. I can't believe this happened on Bloomsday. I feel it was such a pleasure, man. That was the universe falling into place.
Yeah. As James Joyce said so beautifully, where the hand of man never set foot.
Yeah, no, whenever we come around to part 2, I've got 100 million things that I want to say. Since I talked about a lot of things that were not wake related, I feel like there's a very, 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 very short thing that I would like to that I'd like to end with here if I can. We have I did a lot of research behind this, and there's a lot of great stuff out there about the wake. This right here is the most close connection, even though there's all sorts of other connections. The closest connection that I have between my art and Finnegan's Wake and my band, Mama Lujo Collective, is this short little section right here.
Please.
High chanted the elderly waves of Erin in 4-part Palestrian melody, 4 for all one in glee of grief, of loneliness of age, but with a bardic license, there being about of birds and noise quite a sufficient quantity.
Woo! Thank you, Thom.
Yeah,
Over.
man. Let's do part 2. Looking forward to it.